Hi guys. So Power Query has changed my life. I've worked in Power Query for a couple of months now, even though I've got about a decade or more experience in Excel, and it's absolutely changed the way that I've approached problem solving in Excel in the past couple of months at least. And I wanted to share a real world scenario or a real world example, as I try and do in all my videos, with you. And this example comes from Discovery Medical Aid, which is a South African medical aid, their claims report, which actually gives you a report that, in my opinion, is terrible. And it's based off of a PDF report. And I'll show you what the PDF report looks like as well. But this report is, in my opinion, what I call disparate data or dirty data, or call it what you like. But essentially, this data can be much better when it comes to data analysis. And my wife often asks me to do an analysis on our medical aid data. Now, this is not our medical aid data. This is completely anonymized data. I created this from scratch, but it's based off of the exact same model as the Discovery model. So if you're a Discovery client, feel free to download your report and work along with me. You should be able to follow the same pattern as I'm following and the same steps, and it'll only take you 5 or 10 minutes, but you set it up once. And every time you go back and download your Discovery data again, it will automatically convert your data into a usable dashboard that you can report, or that not report on, but that you can actually verify your medical claims. You can see it monthly. You can see the split for in-hospital and out-of-hospital benefits. You can see the different medical service providers, and your data is essentially converted from something that looks like this into something that looks like this, which is much more usable data that I can pivot, data that I can quickly analyze and digitalize. So the idea behind this is that you don't have to be a data analyst or a data scientist in order to convert this kind of data. And this is some of the dirtiest data that I've ever seen. You get a lot of data like this, but what's amazing about this is we are going to be covering so many different things in Power Query. So we will be covering steps. So if I just go and unpack the steps, we're going to be talking about removing top rows, keeping bottom rows, removing bottom rows, replacing values, transposing a table, transposing it back, filling down, filling up. We're going to be merging columns. We're going to be merging queries. We're going to be trimming text. We're going to be removing columns. We'll add custom columns. We'll fill up, fill down, filter rows, promote headers. A lot of the features in Power Query can actually be shown by just this example. Now, Power Query sits at the back of every single Excel since, I think, Excel 2016. And I think it's downloadable from Excel 2013 onwards. So if you have Excel 2013, you can download it. If you have Excel 2016, it should be usable out of the box. I'm on the Insiders channel on Microsoft Office 365, which is your best option, and I can vouch for that option. I pay for it gladly every year, and yeah, let's get into this. So I'm going to show you from scratch how to build this. So I'm going to close down my example, and I'm going to be closing down my CSV file, and I am going to be opening up a new instance of Excel, blank workbook, and I'm going to start with data from text or CSV, because this is a CSV or comma separated values file, and I'm going to navigate to my file. And I'm going to make this file downloadable in the description below. So please feel free to download it and work along with me. Like I said, this is completely anonymized data. It is not someone's data, but it's exactly the same model that I'm faced with when I download my claims report or my medical claims history from Discovery. So firstly, I want to go into transform data. So once I've actually gotten data from text or CSV and I've selected my file, I'm going to click on transform. I always click on transform, and this shows me what my data looks like. Now I'm going to be starting with creating a duplicate from this because I want to create a reference table, and I'm going to call that result codes or reason codes, and you'll see why later on, but that's just a duplicate of that query. I'm going to be closing that down so that I can see my data a bit more. And firstly, I can see that there's information from row 1 to 10 that is actually not relevant to what I want to analyze. So my headings actually start and my headings actually span 2 different rows, and I'm going to show you how to handle that as well. But let's start with removing the top rows. So I want the top 10 rows to be removed, and I'm going to click on under the home tab, remove rows, and I'm going to say remove the top 10 rows. And that would remove all my rows. Now I want to fix my column headings as soon as I can. And how do I do that? I'm going to basically, because I've got, so usually I just go and promote the headers by going use first row as headers. But because I've got my cumulative expenses, for instance, for 21 and 22 over 2 rows, I would want to join them up together. With Power Query, that's easy. There's multiple ways of doing this, but I like using the transposition method. And that is basically transposing. So it's making rows columns and columns rows. So it's just shaping my data in a different way. So when I transpose the table, you'll see my first 2 columns would actually be my header row. And now it's as easy as I want to join this up with this one, but I also want cumulative expenses to fill down or to repeat downwards. So I can use the fill down function or formula for this, and basically just use the transform. I firstly select my column and I go and I fill down. You'll see that nothing happens, and this is because this is a blank and not a null. So if you want to know what the difference between a blank and a null is, go and Google it. But basically, there's a big difference between a blank and a null. So, so a blank in this case cannot be filled down, so I need to remove my blanks first. How do I do that? I can go and replace values. So I'm going to select my column, click on replace values. I'm going to replace nothing with a null, or a blank with a null, and that would make all my blanks nulls. Now, if I actually go and fill down, so I could have just, let me just show you how to do this. So I typically go back one step. Instead of deleting a step, I would go back one step, and I would actually go and do my replace values. And it'll ask me, do I want to insert the step? And I'll say yes. I do want to insert the step, and I'm going to insert that step where I'm going to replace blanks with nulls. It's important that this null is lowercase because Power Query is case sensitive when it comes to nulls. So now when I go to my fill down, you'll see it automatically fills down everything because that step is performed before it. So that's how easy Power Query is. It's step based, and it repeats across all rows and columns as is relevant. So now I can join these two up, and I do that by going merge columns. So I'll select both columns, transform and merge the columns, and my separator in this case that I want to use is just a space. So why I like using a space is because where there's blanks, there'll be a space afterwards, which means I can trim, and we'll look at a trim now. I can call this column whatever I want. It's not going to matter in the end. Right, so I click on OK, and that happens. It's combined this one, and I can see that this is an empty row now because there was an empty row below it. So it's now an empty column, but it's easy for me now to just remove that by just right-clicking and saying remove. Now I can transpose my data back. So my data is now transposed, and all my headings are actually in one row. You'll see cumulative expenses have been properly fixed, and this means I can promote my headers. But before I do that, I'm just going to trim my data for any spaces that there might be. Now Power Query is is clever about this because it doesn't allow trims, or it will actually remove the space is after a specific word, but it will not necessarily remove it before, in my experience. So I'm going to just trim it first. And what is trim? Trim is essentially, wait. So let's do the trim. Let's do the trim before the transposition. So I'm going to trim first over here. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go and say format and trim. And what trim does is it removes any spaces. So there's no longer a space after patient information. Before that, there would have been a space, as you could see there. Right, so my spaces are removed with my trim text, and now I can go and transpose back. Now I've got no spaces in this row, and therefore I don't have to select that row, but I can just go and say, use my first row as my headers, and all my headers will actually be transformed. I can see that I've got a couple of errors. Just want to see what the errors are. So if I want to see why I've got errors, I can actually go and say keep rows, and I just want to keep my errors. And I can see why I've got errors over here. In this case, so in this case it tried, Power Query automatically tried to change the type. So I'm just going to remove the change type because I'll fix that later on. So I'm going to delete that step. Now this kept errors tells me that there's no more errors. So I'll just delete this kept errors, and I'm back. Okay, so errors, keeping your errors will actually show you where your errors come from, and that's a nice way to error handle in Power Query. All right, so I've done quite a lot of things now. One other thing that I want to do is there's a specific spot in the data that has a total. So there's my total, and it's got a total for out of hospital, and it's got a total for in hospital. Now I want to, so everything above total for out of hospital is out of hospital claims. And basically what I want to do is I want to just put that flag next to each line that is out of hospital, as well as each line that's in hospital. So there's various ways of doing this, but the way that I like to do it is by going and saying, right, let's add a column. I'm going to add a custom column, and my custom column, again, I can call it what I want, or let's just call it hospital for now. I'm going to say if my patient information, which is my first column, so if the text.start, so type everything together, don't put the full stop, because otherwise things go whack. Just type text.start and then go tab to select that one, and then I'm going to say patient information. So if patient information's first 9 characters, in this case, equals total 4. Okay, so that's 5 plus 1 space plus 3 is 9. So if that equals total 4, then bring back my patient information. So bring back total 4 out of hospital. Else, bring back null. And again, lowercase null. And I click on OK. So that would have created for me just 2 references, actually 3, I think. I'll show you now. But it would have created the total 4, and again at the complete bottom it'll create a total for in hospital and a total for adjustments. And now I can actually fill up, because I want to fill everything up. Everything above that is relevant to that total. So select my column, go to transform, click on fill up, and that fills everything up for total for in hospital and out of hospital. And now I can just drag this column across just to put it where it makes sense for me. I can do this step at any point in time. It doesn't really matter, and sometimes it takes quite a while, so I'll just move my mouse across and drag it again, and scroll across and drag it again. Right, so now I've got my total for out of hospital, my total for in hospital, and basically what that means is I can delete those rows that are let's call it not applicable, right? So basically this extra patient information, I can remove that, and any blanks, and anywhere. Okay, so let's remove the totals. Okay, so how do I do that? I like right clicking on the actual value that I want to filter out, and I'll go to text filters and I'll say anything that does not contain that, filter for it. So that would have removed just total for out of hospital. But now I can go into my little settings cog over there and I can just change that to total. And that should remove all totals. So if I scroll down now, I won't see any total lines anymore. So there's my cut. You'll see total for out of hospital is gone. And again, if I go to the bottom, you'll see my other total is gone, and my total for adjustments is also gone. Right, so now I can see that my amount claimed is pretty much my most complete field, and also basically does not contain certain amount information. So I'm going to filter out any blanks in this row, and I'm also going to filter out that amount claimed to take out this little second page heading, to take that out. And when I click on OK, that would actually make my data contiguous. So make my data follow on one another. So basically out of hospital and in hospital is following on each other. So next step is I want to fill down all of these, because you can see that this is actually for Jane, Catherine, ABC, pathology, but all three rows are relevant to that same claim. So this claims reference, this date for processing, this date for treatment, and this patient and provider is all the same for these three rows. So I want to fill down everything. Again, we know that these are blanks, not nulls, so I need to make them nulls first. So firstly, I would go and replace my values, replace my blanks with nulls, and then after that I would just fill down. So I can now go and say fill down, and that fills all my data down, makes it contiguous. All right, great. Now what we can do is we can actually take these dates and convert them into dates. I'll just go and right click and say change to a date, and this would convert it. Again, dates actually sometimes convert incorrectly because of the fact that Americans write the date in a different format than Europeans and Africans in my case. So we like writing the date like this: year, month, day, in the order of which it occurs. But when it's written in this, it could have been that let's say the fourth row of the process date could have actually been in America that would have been the 1st of June, not the 6th of Jan. Okay. So in this case, I just want to make sure that I don't have any errors, because a 13th of Jan might actually be converted into the 1st of the 13th month, and there's no 13th month, and that could result in an error. So again, I'll go into home and I'll say keep rows, keep errors. And if this table is empty, means there are no errors in my table. Brilliant. Right, so my dates all converted correctly. Then next up, I want to convert all of my amounts into decimals. So all of these rows up to there are decimal values. And over here, now we're going to see errors, and I'll show you how to fix that. So I'll just select all of them, right click, change type into decimal number, and you can see Power Query is automatically writing all my steps for me. So it's actually no code, low code way to analyze data, but I can see there's many errors. So I can select this column for instance and say keep rows, keep errors, and I can see everywhere where there's an error. And if I hover over an error or click on an error, it will basically tell me it couldn't convert 9.6 into a number. And the reason for that is the fact that in Power Query, decimals are actually written as 9,6 and not 9.6. So I'll just go back one step. I don't have to delete. I can delete my errors step. the change, before the change type step, I actually just need to go and make all of these values, or change all of the full stops into, so instead of a decimal point, it wants a decimal comma, and I'll replace the values, insert the step, yes, and I'll basically look for a full stop, change that into a comma, and go on, click on OK. And that would make all of my decimal points commas. When I go to change type, you'll see I don't have any errors at all. And I can check that by saying, well, take everything, Control A, keep errors. My table is empty, so there are no errors. Beautiful. So I'm almost done. I just want to split up this first field because I would want to see my patient in one column and my provider in another column. So how do I do that? I'll click on my patient information column, split my column by delimiter, and I'll make this a space dash space. In this case, I want to make sure that it's a space dash space, and I just want the leftmost delimiter. There's no delimiters in the name, but in certain cases there could be a dash in a name of a provider. In South Africa, we do have a provider that has a dash in its name, so this helps me not have to deal with that issue. So this creates two columns for me. I've got my patient, and I can rename my column, double clicking and just calling it patient. This would be my provider. Right, and this looks good. So when I'm done, I just need to make sure that I see that all of my information is looking good. I can actually inspect my information, but I'm happy as it is. Now let's get into the reason columns. So this is a reason code column, and it doesn't mean anything to me as the user because I don't know what that reason is. And luckily, oh, I see we've been working in the wrong one. So we'll call this reason codes then. Reason code. Let's just call it reason code so that we don't have duplicates, and then call this detail. All right, so this is my detail. It's ready now, but my reason codes are actually at the bottom of my report. So for some reason they include it as a reference at the bottom of the report. So there I can see my reason code and I can see the reason. So I want to keep this information and I want to make that a reference table. What is a reference table? It's a table that references, that I can reference information to. So it's like a VLOOKUP table or a lookup table. And what I'm going to be doing now is similar to a VLOOKUP, or for those of you that understand and know SQL, it's like a join. So firstly, I want to basically determine how I'm going to do this. So one way that I've done this before is I would write a formula adding a custom column like I did previously, and say if my column 1 is equal to reason code, then keep reason code, or make it 1, and then I'll fill down and take everything below it. That's one option. That's a more robust option, because if the structure of this changes but the name reason code stays there, or there's more reasons in the future or something like that, then I'll account for that. In this case, I just want to show the example of keeping rows at the bottom. So I'm going to say, in this case, keep rows. I want to keep bottom rows, and I know based off of previous experience that the bottom 38 rows should be sufficient. Okay, so it's actually 39 rows, right? So I'll go back into my cog and say keep the bottom 36, or let's say 37 rows, right? So that's enough to just extract my reason codes, and now I can just basically remove the bottom 10 rows or so. It looks like about 10, so I'll say remove the bottom 10. Okay, now I've got some blanks, so I can just filter out my blanks, and I can also remove that reason code descriptions heading at the top. And now I just want this row and this row, so I can just go and control click and right click and say remove all the other columns. Throw away all the other columns, use the first row as headers, and I've got my reason code description and my reason code. For some reason, Power Query throws these, or would swap them around in certain cases. Doesn't really matter in this case because it's not a VLOOKUP, it's a merge. Power Query calls it a merge, but it's actually a join. Okay, and because this is a reference table, I could actually put it below that one, just out of principle. But now let's merge this back. So I want to merge my reason code with this reason code. So it's just like a VLOOKUP. I'm going to go into my query that I want to edit, and I'm going to say merge queries. I can merge my query as a new query, but then that creates a third query, which is unnecessary in this case. So which column do I want to join up? The last one, RC, and I want to join it up with my reason codes, and this is my column that I want to join. And this tells me the selection matches 0. Okay, so it matches 0, which means for some reason Power Query decided to change the type of reason code to numbers automatically without consulting me first. So I'll just remove this step because a number and a text lookup wise, the same with VLOOKUP. So I'll go back into merge queries and I'll go and select my RC column, and I'll go into reason code and I'll select this, and it tells me that 397 of the rows from my first table, which is the table with the detail, has a reason. Okay, the rest are null, and that's why they're not joining up. So this is just like a left join. And you'll see it's a join kind. They just call it merge, but they could have called it a join, but it's like a lookup. So you'll see that this brings back a table because there's 2 fields in my other table. So because it's a left join, I can just drop that field and just bring back my reason code description. And I don't want to use the original column name as a prefix, otherwise it's going to say reason code, or it's going to say something like reason code dot reason code, or reason code dot reason code description. So I just want to bring back reason code description. It's exactly what I didn't want. So I could go back and remove this default column name reference, and then go and just change this to reason. Doesn't really matter how you do it, but you'll see now every single time there's a reason code, I've got an actual reason, and this means I can drop this column and my data's ready. And that's everything you need to know about Power Query. So, well, as a beginner at least, that's everything you need to know. I mean, there's way more that you can get into. I don't think we've covered like even 10% of the features, but these are some of the most used features, and you can actually go into the advanced editor and see that it's all basically what they call M language, but it's all basically written out in code. So once you start getting into Power Query in depth, you can actually do amazing things, and you can write out everything as sort of a programming language. You can pass in parameters. It is a full-fledged language of its own. But let's go back into Excel now. So let's go and close and load. And when I close and load, it'll basically automatically bring back. So on my other computer, I'll actually not. I've got a connection only for everything. So in this case, I can just remove my reason code query, and I can just remove sheet 1, and I can keep my detail. And you'll see that changes to a connection only. But when it's connection only, if I want to bring it back into a table, I can just click on load to and select table and select where I want to load it to. So that's an option. But when I go to my detail, I can see 608 rows have loaded, and I can agree that that is correct. In the end, once I've built my my pivot table, I can quickly check that to the totals in the report and just check that that's correct. But I don't like this green design, so I typically just go and change my design to something more minimalistic, something like this. That looks much more cleaner. And now I can actually go and format my data. So if your data doesn't want to format correctly, that means that Power Query hasn't changed this into a decimal value yet. But I've got my reason codes, I've got all all my fields that I wanted. I've got all my dates, and my dates I can now change to a short date as well. And changing this formatting will also help the pivot table know what kind of field is it working with. But I can now just go and insert a pivot table from this, and I'll call this my summary sheet, and I'll just go and call it summary. And what I would want to do is I would want my patient, my provider, and my hospital status like this perhaps. So I can see for each patient what is my in-hospital and out-of-hospital providers, as well as the amounts that have been claimed from those providers. And I'll just go and change my value field settings into a number format, use 1000 separators, and that looks neat. Okay, but I also want to know when the treatment actually occurred so that I can compare month to month. So that automatically, because it's a date, because Power Query and Excel knows that it's a date, it automatically puts that into columns for me. And that's pretty much what I wanted to see from my dashboard. I want to see for every person on the medical aid, what is the total for in-hospital, out-of-hospital, per provider, and I can even make it per claim. So I can change that to bring in every claim, so I can see that there's 5 different claims over 2 different months for this person, for Anna Maria, and I can see the amounts, and that's great. So if I don't want to show this always, but I want to be able to drill down or go back into it, I can just go and collapse my field, and my reports back to a more simplistic report. Now, if I go back to so if I go back into my Power Query and I could go back down to well, let's go to the total for out of hospital. I could actually just go and compare these on amounts claimed, and I can see that it's 62,868. So in this case, that'll be the total for out of hospital for all 3 people, which would be those totals, 66,225. So there, that's correct, 66,225.20, and total for in-hospital would also be correct. So if I go to my totals, you'll see it's 109,629 cents, and that is correct. So that's my full report. I haven't dropped any critical information in my Power Query. Right, so now I would just finish this little dashboard up with a couple of slicers. So I would put in my patient, provider, hospital, and I'll also include the months from the treatment date, because I've used that as a field. I actually have it as a slicer now. I would also put in my reasons, and that's about it. That's what I would have wanted to see. So I'm just going to select one, Control A, move this around, and then I always change in my pivot table options. You can change this permanently now. I guess I'll do a separate video on that. But you can autofit. You can switch off autofit columns on update, and that means that every time I update this information, my columns won't jump around. They won't expand and contract with the data. I prefer it like that so that I can control how wide I want the columns. And I can set my columns up, or I can just go and select all of them and double click, and then make sure that I make all my month columns the same width as I please. And then I would let's not do that for the sake of the slices, but then I would actually set up my slices. And firstly, I would want to make my months selectable at the top perhaps. So I would do let's just remove these 2 rows at the top, or I could put a report header there, and then I would make my slicer contain more columns. So let's give it 6 columns because I've got 12 months. I'll widen this a little bit, and that gives me the ability to slice and cut my data per month. This gives me the ability to filter for any in-hospital and out of hospital charges. That's my provider, that's my patient. So my patients, I can actually go and select them like that. I know that there's only 3 patients, so I can change my slicer, the size of my slicer, and I can make these look corresponding. I can also go and select 2 of these at the same time and go and align them and say align left so that they actually align on the left, and I can align these up top, align the top of those so that they're the same from the top. And then my providers, because I've got so many, I would want to maybe put them over 2 columns. So I would change my slicer into 2 columns, and finally I'll have my reason code below, and I'll make this a little bit wider, and maybe I'll make this smaller so that it's more readable. But there I've got my dashboard, and I'll go Alt WVG and I'll remove all the grid lines, and I'm ready. So now what's amazing about this is next month, when the next claims have gone through, I can just go and download the same source file. My source file is called search_result.csv. I make sure that I replace this one. I can just maybe create a little backup folder and say this is backup, and then I can drop this one into my backup folder, give it a date range just for backup, save this one out, and if this one replaces the other one and it contains 10 months of data in this case, I can just go right click and refresh. And when I refresh like that, it's gone through all 30 steps or how many ever steps we have there, and it updates everything, and I can just go on my pivot table, refresh, and it's rebuilt the summary, and I've got the next month's data in there. And that's my dashboard that I wanted to share with you guys. So I hope that you can see how amazing and how powerful Power Query is. And this is hopefully the first of many videos that I'll do on Power Query, and I've got another use case that I've got lined up. This next use case is on GL and a TB and a chart of accounts, and how to permanently actually build this, or build it once, or because that's the precipice behind Power Query, is the fact that I can build a workflow once and it's repeatable. Immediately it's repeatable, and I can just use it month on month. I change the data source, or I update the data source, I click on refresh. In the case of a GL, I could add the information on a monthly basis, and I can pull in all of the files from a folder, and I'll show you an example like that in the next video. But if you like this, let me put it this way. If you learned something from this video, you have to go like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't learn anything, just close it, forget about me. But if you've learned something, join my channel. Please like, share, subscribe. Click the bell notification so that you're notified of any new videos that I release. And yeah, share it with your friends. I hope I've added value. And if you actually use Discovery, please try it on yours. Tell me how it went. Leave a comment, and hopefully Discovery sees this and actually fixes their reporting, because it could actually be much better. If a report from Discovery looked like this, it would have been immediately usable, but now it's not. In my case, I've built this once, and I can reuse this workflow every time that I download my report. And I hope you guys get to use it as well. So thank you, and goodbye.